On the WSTO YouTube channel. So one thing I noticed is if you search for Yahara Chocolate on Google, the last talk from WSTO comes up. That we did was Caribbean. The Caribbean chocolate sampling is there, so you can watch that. So yeah, if I give them enough warning and don't say, hey, Mark from Ogle is coming tomorrow, can you come tape it? Then they can make it down here and videotape it. And then I've been meaning to post in the link to that one, to the Caribbean one. I just haven't gotten that far yet.
Thank you.
Golden Dawn. I think there are 2 Golden Dawns over there. So there are 2 more people coming. We'll just fit them in. We'll go ahead and get started here pretty quick as soon as the last Golden Dawn comes out in 90-ish seconds. Everyone's going to have this one. If you've been to a talk before, we sort of try them one by one. What we're going to do today is we're going to sort of try the first 4 sort of all together, one after another, because they're all related to each other. But what you have enough in here to break them in half, so you can try half of one, or you can try a quarter of one. But you can cut them open, but keep them in order because they sort of look similar, right? This one here, closest to the closed end, is number 1. And if you'll see on your map, all the numbers are on your map, so you can sort of see which number chocolate. So you have 1, 2, 3, and 4. 4 is towards the open end, right? And you can just snip the tops off and break them. You can break them right in the package, if you want to.
I managed to get a
Right? If you need to work on your breaking in half, a finger above and a finger below, and a finger in the middle will snap it right. And then if you want to break it smaller, there's enough here for a finger on the top, and a finger on the bottom, and one in the middle. Snap it again. Right? It's nice. I love Dissidente with their nice, easily snappable, squarish pieces. Some chocolate makers don't make nice square pieces, and it makes it hard to snap them. So you'll also notice that's different about this chocolate sampling than we've done in the past is everyone has a tasting guide here. And this is for you to fill out. Every piece of paper is here for you to take home, so you can write it up as much as you want. This tasting guide, we're going to sort of go through this because we have a unique opportunity in this Colombian tasting that the first 4 samples are all related to each other. And so you can note the differences about each one. You can start to work on sort of the flavor profiles that you can sense and tell. Because some people will say, well, which is the best of these 4? Well, if you try them 2 weeks apart from each other, they're all the best. Because you can't remember what the difference is between all 4 of them, right? It's only when you try them back to back to back to back that you can really notice and try and pick out the comparisons. So we'll go over that. There comes the other oolong. And if at any point in time someone decides they do want something to drink, just let us know, let Bobby know. So welcome, my name is Brooke, and Bobby's there to help out. And if you haven't been to the shop before, only a couple of you maybe haven't been to the shop before, we have been selling chocolate here for 5 years. And in that 5 years, we've managed to accumulate 250 different bars of chocolate at any one given point in time. Throughout the year, it may vary quite substantially. And so if you have any questions about any of the chocolate that you see around, we're always here to answer your questions. But it allows us then to collect groups of chocolate that are related and can really do some fun, interactive, educational aspects to the chocolate. We're focusing on Colombia today, partially because Dissidente, what we're going to focus on mainly today, is a brand that's made in Colombia from Colombian cacao. And it's a brand that I import into the United States, so it's something that I really work on educating and distributing. So if you have a local coffee shop that says you do not have good enough chocolate at your coffee shop, have them contact me and I'm happy to help them stock this chocolate. All right, we're working. All right, so here's a map of the world in general. I realized this map I made like 5 years ago, and it drastically needs to be updated, and researching this has made me realize how drastically it needs to be updated. But in general, what you see here is the equator, right? That doesn't need to be updated, that's still where it is, right? When you have 15 degrees north, 15 degrees south, that's generally where cacao grows. Except, you know, you can see Hawaii way over there in the corner, the only place that chocolate grows in the United States, because surprisingly enough, the equator doesn't quite make it, or the 15 degrees doesn't quite make it to South Florida. You know, the Keys may extend way down there. So you'll notice we have different colors here, and the different colors are a whole crazy talking to themselves, because genetics of cacao used to be simple, and now it's not simple at all. So 3 colors won't do, and part of the reason why I haven't updated my map is these colors are to talk about cacao genetics. Now, because I need to use like 12 colors, right? And that just gets too complicated, too hard to think of, so I don't. So in general, what you have is blue is your native range. That's the native range of cacao, where it's always existed for thousands of years, although not exactly true. The real native range is right in here. Come on in, we have your spot right here. We're still on the first slide. So
Great.
So you have your native range right here in Colombia, in Venezuela, in Ecuador, in Peru. And then you have the yellow, which is sort of this other kind of inferior kind of cacao that came out of Brazil that was brought into the world market to make sure that cacao didn't die of disease, that it could grow more places than its native range. And the green is the natural hybrid blending of the two. So that's what those colors generally represent. But like I said, it needs to be updated, and I will work on that. I need to figure out how to do it and not have it be confusing. But we're focusing, what you notice, right in the core of the historical range of cacao there in Colombia. Right? So we're going to be talking about Colombia. And what you notice, a few geographical features of Colombia, is that it is sort of in the middle of everything. Right? You have, who knows all the geography, right? You have Panama, right? Right, and as we go clockwise, we have Venezuela. And as you go clockwise, you have Brazil. And then as you go clockwise, you have Peru. And then you have clockwise, you have Ecuador, right? So if you think about the historical ranges of cacao, you might think of Venezuela, because that's where more of the Mixtec, Aztec chocolate, the best cacao beans in that empire came from the Venezuela area. You may think of Ecuador and Peru, because the oldest known cacao, evidence of cacao consumption comes from the Peru-Ecuador border from 3,500 years ago. So that would be right in here. And you sort of have Colombia right in the middle of it all. And as cacao goes, it's generally a forgotten country, a forgotten reservoir of genetics. You guys have samples and people over there. Right? And so if people don't, again, some of these slides will be repeats if you've been here before. This is a cacao pod, right? Growing on a tree. It grows right out of the side of the tree. And that's what the inside looks like when you break it open. It's a seed covered in this white gelatinous pulp that's super tart, super fruity, super bright. Lots of people will eat that pulp, suck on it, and spit the seed out because the seed tastes terrible. Right? So if you ever have a chance to try pure cacao juice, it's almost too sweet to drink. If you think of juices, you think of apple juice as being really, really sweet. This pulp is sweeter than apple juice naturally. So it's a very, very sweet juice. And then after these are fermented and dried, they become nibs. So these are roasted and dehulled, dehusked, right? And then you have chocolate when these are ground. And mainly what we're going to be talking about is this guy, Monleo. He is the head of Distilling Chocolate. Here he is with some of the farmers that live there. But so now let's go ahead and talk about some of the chocolate we have before you. It's time to try it. So yeah, just in trying. So for Deb and Sean, the first one is closest to your scene. The next, and they go 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. And so. Somehow this one got repeated. There we go. Tasting preparation guide. All right. So what we're going to do, room temperature chocolate. I took care of that for you. Room temperature mouth, or at least not a cold mouth. That's what a hot drink comes from. Because what is cocoa butter used for? Generally, it's used for cosmetics. Why is it used for cosmetics? Because it melts at 98 degrees. your mouth isn't at 98 degrees, the cocoa butter in your chocolate won't melt and it will taste like plastic. So you want to have a warm, or at least a not cold mouth. Smell, that is sort of hard to do in these little wrappers. You may not really be able to smell them, but if you would open up a fresh package, there's lots of aroma that's trapped in that bar for you to smell. 2 small pieces, so we talked about the technique of using your index finger and your forefinger and your thumb and snapping that guy in half so you can break your piece in half. Melt, you're going to let it sit on your tongue and just melt on your tongue and notice the flavor profiles. Right? You can chew it a little bit, but then let it melt. You can press against the roof of your mouth and you can let it melt. Or you can sip a little bit of warm drink while the piece of chocolate is in your mouth and that will melt it more quickly. All right? So go ahead and do that with your first piece of chocolate if you haven't already, if you haven't jumped the gun. And what you're going to be tasting for is, our first one is a 70% blend. Sometimes you'll hear that you have a single origin chocolate from Colombia. Well, great. But you have a single origin chocolate from Colombia, but that can be dissected much further. And so this is Dissidentes blend, and it's designed to be a 70% easy eating, neutral flavored chocolate. So what might you taste? You might taste a lot of this first. A lot of this first one's chocolate, fudge. You probably won't taste any bitterness in this chocolate. Right? But you may taste some chocolate, maybe some fudge. Maybe you taste some earth. Maybe you taste what I call hummus, or like the leaf litter, like just a musty earthiness, right, that you might taste. You might taste wood. Fruity notes, citrus, berry, dried fruit, mellow fruit. Lots of times you'll taste citrusy fruits that you know is a fruit but you've never tasted before because it's from a country that and a fruit you've never heard of. And there's just nothing you can do about that. Except call it that, right? It's tropical, right? It tastes tropical. You can taste herbal, grass, forest, tea leaves, right? It's sort of a grassy feeling. You can have caramely flavors where you have caramel sweetness, creamy flavors. You can have nutty flavors, rich, roasty, nutty. You can have spicy flavors, acidic, sharp type flavors in your flavor profile. And you can have floral flavors, light. I know people think it's funny to put clouds in there, but sometimes you taste a chocolate and it just feels like it's light. Like how should you describe a chocolate that feels light? Well, it's not, you can call it tastes cloudy. I don't know. You can come up obviously with your own issue. This is just here to guide and to give you an idea of what things you can note. If you're into noting, you guys have papers you can note on if you wish. If you're into noting, those are all different flavor profiles that you can feel in your chocolate. And yes, it can be very similar to wine. Yes, it can be very similar to any other food item that you would take your time to savor and enjoy. Right? That there are a lot of flavor profiles in there. So if you've tried your first one, that's their blend of chocolate. And so Dissidentes, they're in Bogota. That's their blend that they make there. But now your next 3 samples, and you can try them in whichever order you want to. We're not going to talk about the origins as much as just tell you what they are, because it's been known that seeing pictures, seeing colors can influence what you feel and how you taste your chocolate. So we're not going to try and differentiate between our 3 chocolates, which are Don Maqueas from the Arhuaca area, the Rio Sinu from the Cordoba area, and the Macarena bar from the Meta area. Right? And so go ahead, taste them all in order. You can break them into smaller pieces and taste them multiple times, and just try and see if you can notice the differences. And we're just going to take some time to taste, to sample these 4 chocolates. Bobby knows what the clipboards are.
And, oh yeah, behind you are extra pen.
Oh, you're right, I swapped the locker
And you won't need the scissors after this, so if you're done cutting. Right, and if you haven't gotten too far, you can also notice some color differences between these chocolates. Like notice the middle one, or the third one, is going to be much lighter in color, even though they're all the same. And so this is a good time to sort of mention percentages. So when we talk about percentages that you see on the front of the bar, what 70% means is 70% chocolate, cacao, and cocoa butter combined, because the government doesn't say that cocoa butter isn't part of chocolate, so it is. So what it really means is it's 30% sugar. Right, is what 70% means. Because it could be 70% chocolate, but it also could be 65% cacao and 5% cocoa butter. But now it still qualifies as 70% bar. And then you can see you have 75% bars, and those, of course, are going to be 25% sugar.
I don't like
And when you read a label, you can see on the back, sometimes ingredient labels will have two ingredients. They'll have cacao, or it could say cocoa mass, or it could say cocoa liqueur, or it could say cocoa nibs, or it could say cocoa beans. Right? We're sort of all talking about the same thing. It'll have sugar, and then it may list cocoa butter as a third ingredient. So these are all ground the same. Well, the last three are all the same percentage, same amount of sugar. They're all ground the same, they're all processed the same, they're all packaged the same, so everything about them is the same, except for the origin of the beans in one of these three areas.
Yes. Yes, I have.
Yeah, sugar is
Of course, if you have any questions, just yell them out and ask. And of course, if we really wanted to do it scientifically, we would have had these four in double-blind setups. So I wouldn't have even know what order they were in, and then everyone would taste them independently, which we have done before in December, which is sort of fun. And maybe we'll do it again this December. The top 10 best chocolates of the year in a double-blind mixed setup, where I know the numbers, but the person who puts them in order, I don't know what order they put them in, and then everyone has to try and sample them, and then we try and match them up. So, we haven't done that for a couple of years, but that was pretty fun. We'll do that again next year, I think. Yeah, and I hear one good thing that I didn't even mention is that not only are there flavor profiles, but there's also texture profiles that you can notice, right? There's whether it's smooth, whether it's rough, whether it leaves any dryness in your mouth, whether it has a long aftertaste, whether there's a lingering flavors that happen, right? Those are all additional qualities of chocolates that you can try or not try, or I mean, that can be good or not good, right? Depending on like sometimes you really get different notes of the chocolate. Some will last longer than others. Some will be shorter bursts of flavor. Some will be longer lasting bursts of flavor. Generally, the more chocolatey and the more bitter the notes, often the longer they're going to last. So some people's wrappers are empty. Some people are going really slow. Some people have just shared, right? So you didn't your pressure one.
We just shared.
All right. Save some for us. Right? That's fine.
It's banana is between citrus and hot.
So are most people gone through all four of their chocolates? Did anyone have an overwhelming? Number one, could people generally tell the difference between all that the chocolates tasted different?
Yeah.
And so when tasting them side by side, you probably have one that you way prefer. Probably most people have one that they way prefer. But what's interesting is a week from now, if you would try one you didn't prefer, you would probably still prefer it, right? Unless it's not necessarily. depends how remembering, your palate is, like how much you can remember what it tastes like. But there are some notes that you may decide you like or you don't like. For me, for example, I really dislike overly strong fruit notes. I just don't like it. So if I find one that has that note in it, I will remember that and never really prefer that one, right? And so you may have some things that you taste and are just rub you the wrong way, right? And that's okay, and that's why we have chocolates. Every single chocolate on the shelf tastes a little different. So let's talk a little bit about the regions that these chocolates have come from. So this is an example of what a cacao farm would look like. Lots of times they're shade grown. These are some of the farmers, and we're in Rio Sanua, right? So this is the first one. So the Rio Sanua is on the northern coast of Colombia. And one of the things that's really happened with Colombian cacao is it wasn't really a thing before the 1950s. It was there, but it was sort of the ignored area of its native range because all the highest quality cacao came out of Venezuela. All the most ancient genetic cacao came out of Peru and Ecuador. Colombia had all the same genetic material, but no one really paid attention, right, to what Colombia had. So there were not really cacao farms that were widely known outside of local populations until like the 50s or 60s. And so, for the most part, cacao was always grown to be consumed by your family, or locally, or sold at a local market, or traded for chicken, or whatever. So in Rio Sanua area, the big challenge in the Rio Sanua area, and what's really happened, what's really revitalized the cacao industry since in the 90s, is the huge change in the government, in the war not being quite so vicious as it was, as the cocaine industry not being quite so vicious as it was, because cocaine and cacao grow in the exact same climate, unlike coffee, which often is growing at higher altitudes. So everywhere you see a cacao tree planted, there could have been a coca field 10 years previous. And so the government is working hard, the U.S. is working hard, lots of people are working hard to change this over. So this northern coast of Colombia is one of those areas. They're fighting replacing fields that used to be grown as coca, fighting what's replacing it as not sustainable agriculture in terms of cattle ranching, in terms of that sort of things, or just standard environmental exploitation. Right? And so it's taking a group of people to say this is what you can do with this cacao, and it's taking a group of people to buy the cacao to convince them that they can get paid for what they're doing. So here's an example of the field, collecting some pods. Obviously they would have a basket. These are not, this is a show, right? Not an actual in-work stuff. And then what they do is after they harvest the cacao and break it open like we saw sort of in the beginning where you had the long string of the seeds in there, these are fermentation baskets. So all those seeds are put into these fermentation boxes covered with banana leaves and then often covered with burlap to keep flies off. So those are the fermentation boxes. And then after they're fermented for a week-ish, right, then they're dried in the sun. Right? And so these have the hulls on them. Then after these are dried, these are packaged, and then the chocolate maker will roast them, crack them, winnow the husk off, and then you get nibs like we saw in the very beginning as well. Similar, we have an area here in the Macarena area, so this is a hilly area. Again, you can see a similar idea of the plantation. This planted, right? Clearly planted area, intercrop with bananas. Bananas are the most common crop to intercrop with cacao because banana leaves are the most common leaf to put on top of fermented cacao boxes because the yeasts on banana leaves are just traditionally what have always been used to inoculate the piles when you're fermenting the cacao with them. So bananas, and they grow tall, and they leave the understory open so cacao trees have plenty of space to grow while they're partially shaded from the top. But what you can see cacao needs is infrastructure, right? To be produced at this scale, you need infrastructure, you need buildings, you need people who know what they're doing, and that's what Dissidente works on, is creating that infrastructure in the community, creating someone in that community that knows the fermentation, that knows what they're doing, and then Cacao Dissidente will go and buy from that community ones. There's someone sort of in that community that knows what's going on, right? That knows what they want. Yeah. All right, so those are sort of the areas of sort of the idea of how the Columbia works in terms of the infrastructure that's been built up there. And now what we're going to try is we're going to go ahead and cast one around. Everyone can take a sample out. Is we're going to try what are other companies doing, because Columbia does export cacao now. So go ahead and take one of these samples. The next place that we're going is a plantation called Betulia. Right? So the Betulia area is, you can see, sort of in the middle of Arhuaca over here and Rio Sinu over here. Here, I'll hold one of these up. So this is by Yahara Chocolate in Lithuania. And he's able to source particular rare cacaos and make what he calls nanolots. So for a internationally distributed chocolate maker, a nanolot means you're making maybe 1,000, 2,000 bars, right, or something like this. What's really fun about this bar is, and we did our best, although it was a challenge. It was a challenge. You'll notice in the back of this bar, the beans that are used to make the bar are impressed into the back of the bar. So in everyone's cup, we tried to get a piece of one of the beans, so you can try the bean that's been roasted but not ground as well. But also notice the color. Notice what crazy color this has. And if we read the back of the bar, it says the Hacienda Betulia is a Swiss Colombian family business located in the cacao cultivar area of Colombia. The environmental landscape with its ideal soil and environmental conditions is situated just to the east of the provincial capital of Medellin. They have all the required elements of the plantation, right? And this actually gets into something that's way deeper than we're going to cover today, but it's worth at least mentioning, is here's the infrastructure at Hacienda Betulia. What does it look like? Well, it looks expensive. Right? It looks expensive. This is a plantation based in money. This family went in with a lot of money to make this plantation. And what do they get? They give you a rare cacao. Go ahead and try it. They give you something that's amazing. Right? They're very different. Right? But notice your flavor profiles of this bar. You have room for this one. So it is made from a pure Criollo chocolate. Criollo would have been the blue in that initial map that I showed. Criollo means, in Spanish, means native. It means the cacao that's always been there. Genetically, it means the cacao that's the most ancient in the genetic lineage. If you follow the lineage of all the cacaos back to the progenitor cacao, right? It's old. Right? This is the cacao that was the most prized cacao by the Miztec, by the Aztec empires. Right? This is predominantly known in Venezuela. Venezuela is known for the amazing Criollo cacao. So if we back up, and remember where Venezuela is, right here, right? There's clearly Criollo cacao on this side of the border too. But we'll get back to this a little bit, that to produce cacao, it requires infrastructure. So if you are not a cooperative and you don't have some external source of funds, you have to come up with those funds yourself, right? You can go and stay at the luxury hotel on this estate as well. Right? Just the fact that they also sell heirloom cacao is part of the preservation, but lots of times preserving something rare also means that it's probably not economically viable to do on its own, right? And it does require infrastructure, it does require influx of capital. And what you get from a Criollo, what you would have tried, if you got a little crunch of something, that would have been the seed, the nib. Notice how these insides are white. Criollo beans are known for a white cotyledons, white interior of the bean, which gives it that light color. A traditional bean that you get in normal chocolate bar would be purple on the inside. Okay, and it would give you a much darker color. What do people think of that one?
That was great.
You didn't like that one? Well, and this is what's interesting about this chocolate is how many people would have described that chocolate as chocolatey. You felt nutty, right? A lot of people have said maybe it didn't taste because there's so many of those other flavor profiles going on, right? Which is why sometimes people find it weird that I describe a chocolate as chocolatey, but now you can sort of understand what that means, right? You can have a chocolate that has so many other flavor characteristics that you don't even realize that you're eating chocolate, right? But there's chocolates for everyone, right? And so there are certain ones that really stick to your flavor profile and some that don't. So now we're going to go on to the next one, and we're going down here to the coast of Colombia, southern coast. And I really wish I had Cacao Hunters. Cacao Hunters is another company that makes chocolate in Colombia, and they really work with populations to recover what has been lost or what needs to be marketed better. But I wasn't able to get Cacao Hunters this year. So now we're going to Tumaco, and this is from Checaset. So this is Tumaco Checaset bar from Massachusetts. This area of Colombia is historically a cacao producing area of Colombia. Here they have always produced cacao. As far as anyone can remember, cacao has grown in this area. And let's contrast that with Hacienda Betulia about how they dry their cacao. Right? So Cacao Hunters came to this area in the 90s and saw cacao everywhere. It was drying on people's roofs. It was drying on pieces of tarps by the sides of the road. Cacao was everywhere, and it was sold in the local market. This was the historical area where cacao was grown, but no one paid any attention to what kind of cacao it was. So go ahead and try your Tumaco bar from Checaset. Like I said, I wish I would have had the Cacao Hunters Tumaco bar, but I was not able to get it this year. It wasn't imported in the United States.
Do they taste similar?
No. Well, I mean, they sort of do. The Tumaco bar that I wish people could try was the 82%, which is much darker. The flavor profile is similar, but the level of sugar is different, and then it brings out different nuances of flavors. Right? Right, so what you're getting here is, look at the colors of these beans. Now some of these are dried and some of them aren't, but you can, just look at all the different things you have here, right? All of this is going into a pot, right? You're getting a blend, and when you blend all these things together, I don't know if it gives you a little bit of a reflection of the very first bar you tried, which is a blend. But this one is getting a blend of all these beans that grew there in Tumaco. Right? So I'll try not to influence it a great deal, although if I were to describe this bar, it almost tastes more rustic to me. Right? And so when people ask me, what is your favorite chocolate? What's the best chocolate in the world? That's not necessarily the right question. The question is, what chocolate is interesting, or what chocolate tells a story? And you can taste this chocolate compared to the Betulia chocolate, also obviously tells a story, right? To the different chocolates, and try and understand why they're different. And they're different because you're dealing with a population that's growing cacao for drinks. Cacao is always a drink, and it's being cultivated and made into a bar, and you're getting sort of the rusticness of what cacao is. Right? And it does very well in a darker bar, so that's partially why I like the Cacao Hunters 82. Part of the problem with the Cacao Hunters 82 and why it's not in the United States is honestly its packaging. Its packaging was so boring that no one ever bought it. And it's true, if I have a bar on the shelf and its package is so boring that I have to describe it to someone for them to pick it up. I just don't have time to do that, right? And I would argue, to some extent, that the Dissidente suffers from the same issue, right? But this gets to the other side of cacao, and again, we can look, this is what transparency means in chocolate. Lots of people say, is your chocolate fair trade? Well, it's not fair trade necessarily, because being fair trade costs money. Right? You have to pay someone to certify you as fair trade. What you get instead is transparency. Right? So Uncommon Cacao is one of the biggest importers of craft chocolate in the United States. And you can notice what they do about every single origin they import, right, is they highlight different things, right? So they highlight how many people are involved. They highlight how many people are under 35. That's important because many places in the world, the average age of a cacao farmer is 60 years old, right? Because there's no, you know, how are you going to get someone young interested in something that there's no money in? Right? And so they have, Uncommon Cacao has this sort of information on every single one, and one of the origins, and the reason why it's important is almost every U.S. manufacturer uses Uncommon Cacao sourcing to bring those beans into the country. Right? The other thing to highlight is down here, we have the average farm size of 3.8 hectares, which I did have to re-look up so I could translate it for people, which is about 9 acres. But notice that how much they're making off of their 9 acres a year. Right? Cacao is very much a subsistence farming
It's like
thing.
$840.
Yeah. Down here they tell you how much everything costs. So you have the average price at the market, farm gate price. What does that mean? Farm gate means what is the farmer getting when they pass the cacao off their property? How much do they get exactly in return in reality? Right? So you go from $1.99 to $2.46. So that's the difference between them walking to the market and selling it themselves and them paying someone to take it off their farm for them.
That's per kilogram?
Yeah. And then the association, the only way they have enough cacao is to work through an association of farmers. So this is what the association charges someone to buy the cacao for. So the difference there is what the association's cut is. FOB price is sort of a old historic term. It means there's been a lot, it's amazing if you go back and look at this stuff, the amount of litigation that's happened in the 40s, the 30s, the 20s about when your that when your cargo is swinging on the big boom, going from a dock onto a ship, at what point is it no longer yours? And at what point is it now the person who bought it? So that essentially stands for the cost of that product crossing from the dock onto the ship. Right? And so that's essentially the shipped price. That's when Uncommon Cacao takes possession of it. Right? And it crosses the rail. So crossing the rail is crossing the railing of the boat, and now it's not mine, now it's yours, even if it's still swinging, right? And so there's been things where things have been swinging and they've fallen. Well, it crossed and then it came back, so who is responsible for it? Right? Anyway, but that's it's just sort of the interesting history of the term, right? And then this is what Cacao Hunter sells it, or what Uncommon Cacao sells it for, right? So when people talk about transparent sourcing and not necessarily fair trade sourcing, this is what it means. It means you know all the information about what's going on. But the key part is going back, is going back here, right? Farmers don't make very much, even when they're getting paid more than they would otherwise. And this is, of course, selling it themselves, this price down here, right? If they were selling that into the bulk markets, they get half that. Right? If they're buying and selling to a local commodities trader. Right? So by selling through the association, they're getting more than double, right? Because this takes a lot of work in small quantities. this, at least it's all that you purchased, right? So when you look at the cost of a chocolate bar, your costs are very much related to labor and how much the farmer has been paid for their labor. Whether you're paying $1, $2, $10. Now, of course, that's not universally true, but I try and make it true for what I sell, although I can't claim to perfect all that as well. So any questions about this sort of stuff? We've sort of touched on some of the various crazy economies that happen in cacao producing world, whether you have money and you're financing a plantation, whether you're a farmer trying to make a living, whether you're trying to convert from something illegal to legal, whether you're trying to convince your kid that you want to become a farmer. I mean, it's not necessarily easy in the United States either, right? Where on a good year you can make a decent amount of money, but in cacao, where it's really not seasonal, you're still stuck with not making very much money. So a lot of these companies, what they're doing, like Dissidente and what a lot of these companies are doing, are not necessarily trying to change this price, but trying to change this. How can you manage your property so that you produce more cacao? And that's what a lot of work is going into, both in the Dominican Republic, where I get my cacao, and in countries all over the world. So any questions about any of that? All right, so now what we're going to do is the last 3 chocolates on our list, I don't really have anything to say except they're fun chocolates to try, right? So you try and you tell me what you think. I'll sort of describe them. Bobby will sort of pass them out one by one as we go. These cacaos are all by Dissidente. These chocolates are all by Dissidente. The first one is cashew. So cashews, one of the things that grows often intercropped with cacao are cashew plants. And they grow wild. And so this is a cashew bar ground with cashews. As sort of, some people would call it a dairy alternative bar. Because notice how soft it is, notice how sweet it is, right? But it's no dairy in it, it's just cashews. Right? So take your time to enjoy that one. You can take your tasting notes on that one as well. Hopefully nutty is one of them. Although cashews often are the least nutty of nuts, right? Often you may be dominated more by creamy, or by, there may be other flavor profiles that are in there.
I can pick that one up and get that out of your way.
And then the last 2 are a mango and a pineapple. And both these mango and pineapple bars are by Dissidente. They're based on the 70% blend that you already tried. So these are the mango and the pineapple that Bobby's handing out now are based on the 70% blend with freeze-dried fruit that's grown in Colombia. So freeze-dried Colombian mango and freeze-dried Colombian pineapple. Now they have a special term for their freeze drying, which I can't remember at the moment. But essentially, I don't know if anyone knows sort of how freeze drying works, is you freeze whatever it is down to like -40 degrees, -60 degrees, something like that, until it's locked, its structure is locked in. Then you put it under a vacuum, and under vacuum, then you very slowly heat it up to room temperature. But it all has to be done under vacuum. But that takes a lot of energy. So the process that they use to make these is a warm process freeze drying, where it only goes down to like 0. And it has some specific name. So anyway, so essentially it does the same thing, but it's less energy intensive. But again, this is done in Colombia by them. So what you get when something's properly freeze dried is something that is a little hard, a little chewy, but if you bite into it, it sort of tears, is the texture, which you don't get from something that's just dry. It gets very chewy. So hopefully this will tear, will bite a little. It's also susceptible to humidity. So sometimes storing this or freeze-dried something for a long time changes that flavor profile. So, any comments, any questions? I guess we sort of zipped through, and there weren't any questions to slow me down, so we sort of went. So I got nothing else, but I'm here to answer any chocolate questions that you have. Anything that you thought, any comments? Don't have any questions, any comments of your favorite? Yeah.
What does fermented cacao bean smell like? Or does it even have, do you notice a smell? What does it smell
Well,
like?
I've only been in presence of fermented cacao beans once, and it smelled sort of composty. I also didn't take that long to smell it because there were flies everywhere, and they didn't really want to open it up very long, right? But it generates a lot of heat, and there are lots and lots of ways that you can ferment. There's so much sugar in the pulp that surrounds the cacao bean that it ferments very easily. And so you can make a big pile and let it not change it, and then it gets very hot in the center. You can constantly stir it. Most of the box fermentation has air below, and those are stirred every few hours to make a very even fermentation. But yes, it has been known. I didn't see it where I was, but obviously you're fermenting a sugar. There is history of collecting the fermented product, right, and making alcoholic drinks out of it.
Does that help?
I actually don't know. I'm surprised it's not more prevalent, so it may be something that's not terribly palatable. Because it's not something that you hear marketed ever, right? And if there were a reason to market something, you'd think making it alcoholic would be a reason to market it, right?
But a lot of alcohol isn't palatable.
I suppose you're right. A lot of alcohol is not palatable.
It's just
What
like that.
difference
There you
makes
go.
It probably, yeah. And it may not just be worth it, but
Well, with all those sugars too, it would be hard to thaw wood and
yeah,
it would go off.
I
pretty
don't know the
fast.
finer points of distilling and bottling fermented product, but I'm sure it's not fully fermented. But as it ferments, the cell walls break down around the cacao because that white pulp is never removed. When it dries in the sun, it just makes that a really thin film on the husk of the bean, imparting some of the color.
So is there any alcohol content in the chocolate? That's all. So the sugar and the alcohol go.
I'm pretty sure that the fermentation does not take it to be extremely alcoholic. I think you'd have to collect the liquid that's running off and do additional steps to actually make it alcoholic.
Why do you ferment at all? Maybe miss that part.
Yeah, so we didn't go into fermenting and why to ferment, but the natural stages of cacao are picking, breaking the pot open, fermenting, and then drying. What fermenting does is it starts developing the flavor of the chocolate. It is a way to get rid of that pulp so you can actually dry it, because you can't just dry it or else it would ferment anyways. It would rot essentially in the sun if it weren't fermented. If you try to dry it without removing that white pulp.
And just wash it off.
You absolutely can.
Rinse.
You can. It's called cacao lavado, right? In Mexico, and there are certain areas that do that. But the reason why you don't is because it's been shown, and this is one of the big, contributions to cacao flavor that craft chocolate makers have made, is that controlling the fermenting process has almost as big an effect on the flavor of the chocolate as the tree it comes from. And so I have one maker from Taiwan who loves to play with his chocolate, and I haven't put it out here yet, but he's actually marketed chocolate fermented in different ways. And he's actually said on his website there are certain chocolates that were not sellable because they were inoculated, and he intentionally inoculates the fermentation pile with different yeasts, with the wine brewing yeast, with the beer brewing yeast, with the vinegar type yeast, right? You can inoculate it with different yeasts. And he's made some cacaos that he said taste like meat, like just tastes terrible. Like even though it's the same thing, but just because of the yeast that it's been inoculated with.
So usually it would just be whatever's in the air, like
Well,
sour.
normally, like I've said, everywhere I've gone, everywhere I've seen, every picture I've seen, it's always banana leaves. And it's the yeast coming off the banana leaves that are traditional for the fermentation of everything out.
So,
Yeah.
so like the big commercial chocolate makers like Hershey's and Nestle's, like what do they do
What-
It's different from like what you're talking
Right,
about.
what the big commercials do exactly what Deb suggested, because for a big maker, for everyone, money is time, time is money. So what do? They collect the cacao, they put it into big industrial dryers, they strip all the pulp off the beans, and their cacao is dried and packaged in a bag within 24 hours. As opposed to waiting a week for the natural process to take its toll, right, to ferment. They don't allow the fermentation to happen at all. They just strip that right off, put it in an industrial dryer, and then package it up and sell it. And so that's what all chocolate is done. I did for a while, I wish I could still have it, at a company that worked in Ecuador and collected all the cacao juice that was pulled from a big industrial chocolate maker and bottled it and sold it. Shoka soda was one that I had here for a while, and it was 50% sparkling water and 50% cacao juice, and it was incredibly good. But distribution and packaging changed, so I can't get it anymore. But so that's what's done by big companies, and what you've lost is the entire development of the flavor of the chocolate. Yeah.
So I notice you have powder up here, so is the preparation and bean different for a drinking chocolate than for the candy chocolate?
Yeah, so a drinking chocolate, generally your chocolate can be much rougher. It doesn't have to be ground so fine. So when we're grinding chocolate, like when I'm grinding chocolate, I don't know if you can hear it back there, when I'm grinding chocolate, it grinds for 48 hours between two pieces of granite. Right? You have a granite roller and a granite disc. And it rolls for 48 hours to get your particle size fine enough so that our tongue can't taste the texture of the chocolate. Right? So we're shooting for 30 microns. That's what we're shooting for with your tongue, and you want to taste the texture of chocolate. You can have drinking chocolate that's 200 microns, so bigger than the width of your hair, that makes amazing drinking chocolate, and you don't notice texture. So it can be processed by hand. You can sit there if you want to, if you've ever been to a country that has it, and they say, oh, it's fun, let's make some chocolate, and you sit there with your matate yamano and going like this, right? And then your stuff slowly melts, right? But you can make that into drinking chocolate. And it doesn't require that. But also, the main reason is not because of that, it's because drinking chocolate is already melted. And in these countries, you don't have to air condition your drinking chocolate, whereas if you make a chocolate bar, you have to air condition your chocolate bar to keep it from melting.
So you just don't melt a chocolate bar and make a drink, but you could. but you
Well,
wouldn't
so
do
it generally has so much sugar in it that it doesn't melt anyway. So if I get around to, I might start collecting bars from El Salvador as well, because it would be fun to do El Salvador. I like to, because Belu is a company, again, that I import her chocolate from El Salvador. She makes it in El Salvador. She started because they make tablilla, which is their traditional drinking chocolate, at the town mill. You just go down to the mill and you pay them 25 cents, and they run your cacao and your sugar and your spices through the mill, and you collect what comes out. It's really hot. You run it home because you need to form it before it cools, because when it cools as hard as a rock, right? And then you shape it, and then you would shape it into your sauces or shape it into your drink, right? That's sort of the traditional way to do it. Those were done with approximately, I think she said 5 parts sugar, 1 part cacao. Right? And when she wanted to do it, she did it differently. She wanted to do 1 part sugar, 1 part cacao. So she'd pay him an extra 25 cents to clean the mill first, and she'd pay him another extra 25 cents to run it through twice, so it's a little bit finer. And then she would take that home, and that's how she started. But then she realized she just kept chewing on her tortilla, and she wanted to make chocolate bars, so then that became how she started making chocolate bars. And like when I was in Grenada, and the only place that was air conditioned that wasn't a tourist hotel would have been the chocolate room of a chocolate maker.
Did you go to a chocolate maker?
Yeah, Fish Bay was one, and then we went to Journey Chocolate as well, and Belmont. Yeah, so all those places, the only places that were air conditioned were the factory floors, essentially. Independent place. But the 3 places we went to, except for the visitor center or the gift shop, those might have been air conditioned as well. So,
The nibs come from beans. Where does the cocoa butter come from?
so if you have a 10-ton hydraulic press, you can take your nibs and you can put them in the press and you press the nibs, and then that pressing generates heat, and that heat melts your nibs essentially, and then all the cocoa butter will come out the bottom. That's where you get cocoa butter. And everything that's left over is put in a grinder and ground that cocoa powder. The cocoa powder is what's been pressed, and what's come out is cocoa butter, similar to how you would press olives and get olive oil. You press cocoa beans, you get cocoa butter. It's called cocoa butter because it's solid on the front, as opposed to cocoa oil.
So what would they do before we had hydraulic presses?
You wouldn't separate the cocoa butter.
Okay.
The cosmetics industry dictated that we separate cocoa butter. Well, and also a big company will completely separate all the chocolate into its components and then recombine it exactly how they want to do, right? As opposed to keeping it whole, because you can have white chocolate here that's cocoa butter based, right? White chocolate and cocoa solids in it. But it'll taste way different than a traditional white chocolate because it's not been deodorized, it's not been starched, it's not been bleached, it's not been, right? It's just been pressed, and you take that cocoa butter and you make chocolate out of it, or you make white chocolate out of it, as opposed to going through the whole industrial process, just like brown sugar at your grocery store is white sugar that they've added molasses to, right? It's not natural sugar that was that color to begin with. Any other chocolate questions? One thing that we have, so all the bars, if you're interested in any of them, are here on the counter. You're welcome to take any of the papers that you want. You're welcome to stay and ask more questions if you want. We do have, if it's something that you would like, we do have the complete collection of Dissidente bars, which is over on the counter over there. It has all 10 of their bars in it. That normally we sell as a $90 tasting pack, but we have as a $72 tasting pack. If people are interested in all 10 of the Dissidente bars, and trying those, and that comes in a pack like this. Right? Including their 100% bar, if you ever want to try 100% chocolate. That's just one ingredient, right? You have to be a little suspicious of 100% bars sometimes, because you can look at 100% bar and remember cocoa butter counts. So you see cocoa beans, cocoa butter, but you don't know how much cocoa butter they put in. This has one ingredient, cocoa beans, right? So you get all their bars, and then you get a lot of what I told you today as a little tasting amount. Something like that. The only other bar in there that we didn't try today, we didn't try the Dissidente Nibs bar, and we didn't try the Dissidente Strawberry bar. Those are the other two that are in the pack. All the Dissidente bars are $10 except for the cashew bar, which is $12, because for whatever reason cashews went crazy expensive. So everything cashew based, really. Just like hazelnuts got expensive too. Check cassette bar is $10. The naive bar, if you like the Vetulia bar, is, and this is something else to bring up, just in case now that you've eaten it, now I can tell you. No, is chocolate never expires, but it gets past its best by date, right? And what that means is it's gotten old. And when it gets old, cocoa butter will migrate out of the chocolate and make a thin film on the surface of the chocolate, and it changes the texture of the chocolate. That Vetulia bar is a year past its best by date, right? But it doesn't really affect the flavor all that much, but because it has a date on it that's a year ago, we sell it in our bargain bowl at a discount because we don't want someone to buy it not realizing what they're getting and taking it home and being disappointed. So those were normally like $15 bars, but I think they're in our bargain bowl for $10 too. So, yeah. So always look in the bargain bowl. It's still good stuff. It's just a little bit cheaper. Oh, Bobby put it over there. So it's always hard to find milk chocolate. Those are the sell the quickest. But we do have some of the Fruition salted dark milk. If you want to, that's really good.
What is it?
This one.
Fruition salted dark milk.
This is salted. I have some more back here too. So that one.
We didn't realize that. I think its Best Buy was what, a month ago.
Yeah.
It wasn't that long ago, but again, just because we don't want people to take something home and realize, hey, this is expired, but it's not, right? It just goes there. So that's always a good place to look. So set that there. I don't currently have a talk scheduled for July, in case you were wondering. I do hope to have one in August. I'm hoping that it will be on chocolate in Peru, because I'm hoping to go to Peru in 3 weeks. But they haven't told me yet, so I'm just waiting. The Peruvian government, their agricultural arm, that invited me to go to their chocolate salon in Lima, which is their biggest chocolate national conference in Lima that takes 2 days. And they said, oh, we'll let you know. Well, I'm still waiting, so I don't know. Because they pay for everything, so it's not like I can complain that much. Unless I don't go and I say, come on guys, hurry. So hopefully in August I'll bring back a whole bunch of fun stuff for Peru and the people in Peru. And what's great about doing that, like when we did the one of Grenada, is if I go to the country and bring the stuff back, we can get a lot of stuff you can't buy in the United States. There'll be a lot of fun stuff to try. We do that from Peru. Right now we have cacao suyo, which is made in Peru, from Peruvian cacao. We have cantu, where the wife is Peruvian, the husband is Canadian. They make their stuff in Canada, but they have a lot of Peruvian cacao. And Obala sources all their stuff from Peru, because Chile doesn't grow cacao, but Peru's the next closest neighbor. So a lot of good stuff from Peru too.
So when you came back from Grenada, did you like stuff your suitcase full? Are you serious?
It's a second suitcase.
It wasn't that full, but yes, there's a lot of chocolate in the suitcase. You have to weigh your suitcase, and you don't buy any souvenirs, and you know you have 10 pounds.
It's gonna melt? You worry about that?
No. I mean, yes, I do worry about it, but no, it didn't melt. And you know you have 10 pounds to play with, so you can buy 10 pounds of chocolate and still stay under 50 pounds.
Just leave a few. Leave your shoes.
Yeah, you can leave stuff right if it gets too heavy. Yeah, no, I bought a lot of stuff at the gift shops around, and you can buy a lot of stuff right from the plantations, like all the Belmont Estate stuff I brought back. Actually, I got most of it at the grocery store, because the grocery store section in Grenada had all the local chocolates, and it was just real simpler. I was worried more about melting, about being in the taxi all the way back in the 5-hour ride from than it melting then, than actually traveling home. So I bought most of it in the grocery store, I'll be honest. Yeah, so hopefully we'll do that in August for Peru, so we'll be looking for that. But also, if you want, a chocolate tasting at your next business or family event, let me know. I can come to you. So. Or you can express your amazing cacao knowledge, and I can create something for you with a little tasting guide that then you can impress all of them.
Oh my God. Me too.